How's it going, Miriam? It's really good to finally have you on the podcast. I feel like we tried to get this thing together a couple times over the past like 6 months at this point, and it's just been a mess in both of our schedules, I feel.
Hey Joe, yeah, it's great to finally meet you. And yeah, I don't know, but yay, we finally made it. So good to speaking to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Miriam, before we dive into what a security researcher does at Microsoft, I want to start off with your background. How did you get into IT? What was that journey like for you? What was that process like? Did you have any mentors along the way to kind of, guide you down that path, or did you discover it and go down it all on your own?
So I was kind of always interested in IT. When I was a kid, I was like, okay, I want to become a game developer or a hacker, but hacker is illegal, so that was off the table. And surprisingly, I never became a game developer either. So, um, but somehow I always wanted to know how to communicate with computers. And I started programming very early. I think I was 8 years old or something like that when I developed my first game on my little learning laptop. And later then, after I finished school, I was like, okay, what do I do with my life? And honestly, I had no idea. Like everybody out there, after they finish school, maybe there are some people, but they are very rarely, I think. And yeah, so although my parents were quite against me playing and working with computers, surprisingly, it was my parents who found yeah, in the newspaper, they found the call for application, so for an apprenticeship, and this is when I originally got into IT.
That's really interesting. So you're based out of Germany, right?
Yes. So if I make any mistakes, I'm sorry. I'm not a native speaker.
Oh, no problem. I've spent a decent amount of time in Germany, and I've always been surprised as to how well everyone can speak English. And so, like, whenever I'm there, I try to like ramp myself up on German and speak German until I can't anymore, and then like when the conversation gets to a point where I can't handle it, it's like, all right, I'm sorry, like I'm English native speaker, and they like test out
Nice.
their English on me, and it's a fun interaction.
Nice. That's really cool. Now you also have to deliver. So what's your favorite German word?
Oh, I don't know if I can even say that. So this is the thing, right? So I studied German in college as like my foreign language. I had to choose one, and so I chose German. I studied abroad in Germany for about 6 weeks, and I was getting to the point where I could hear it and understand it like fluently, pretty much, but responding was a little bit slow, and I was still getting used to it and whatnot. And then I came back to the States, and I've been back a couple times ever since. But it's like when I get there, there's such a huge gap. But after about 10 days of being in Germany, I start,
Yeah.
developing the skills of being able to hear it and understand what's going on. Like, last year I was in Germany with a friend for the Tampa Bay Bucks game. And in the beginning, it was difficult. Like I knew what different words were and whatnot. Like if I was looking at like the U-Bahn map or whatnot, or the S-Bahn, um, like I knew what they were, right? I knew which direction I was going, but like translating it just didn't work in my brain. and then, and
Uh,
then, like we were there for probably 10 days. By the end of my stay, though, I was right back to hearing it and understanding it. And I was like translating it to my friend, like, oh, this is what they mean. Like, we got to go over here, do this.
nice.
And so it's a frustrating journey for me because I wish I could just move there.
Wow. I did not know that you actually were in Germany for some time. But yeah, cool.
Yeah. I've spent some time in Berlin, Frankfurt, Dusseldorf, Munich. Um, I think I think I need to go other places other than other than Germany for my next vacation, unless it's for Oktoberfest, and then I'll go. Um, but yeah, I love it. I love going there. It's always a great time. Great atmosphere. Everyone's so friendly. That's what always like threw me off in the beginning, was that like everyone is so friendly.
Yes, and if you reconsider and plan your vacation, your next vacation in Germany, give me a ping and let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. So so you mentioned that you got your start as an apprenticeship in IT. And
Yes.
is that pretty typical for apprenticeships in IT in Germany? And I ask very specifically because, um, through my studies, right, we learned about the education system in Germany and how after school you typically, like, for different trades, you'll go and be an apprentice for, at a certain point in your education, you start being an apprentice, and then you actually transition into the actual field. I didn't realize that IT even had that option of being an apprentice, right? So is that a pretty typical path, or is that, an outlying path, I guess?
I think back then it was quite a new thing. So there were two paths. So one path was working with the systems. The other path was development. And as I thought, okay, I already know how to develop programs. I thought, okay, I want to learn about the systems. And that was basically my direction. But you asked me if that is a typical thing. Um, I would say it depends. I still see that studying also brings you quite far in some companies, especially if it's government or public sector. Then you need to have studied. But there are also a lot of people that are following apprenticeship path. So, and they, look at me. I was in luck and got in the best position ever. And, I originally went to the school that would have allowed me to study after, but after school I was like, I don't want to learn any longer, and so I started the apprenticeship, and suddenly I just started learning everything I could, and I never stopped. And yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. You you got out of it saying that you don't want to learn anymore, and then you get into cybersecurity and IT, where like the learning never ends.
Yeah. And I think it also really became my passion to just learn and learn and learn everything I could find. So, but yeah, I also thought every time, okay, maybe studying at some point would be beneficial, would be cool. But well, I never studied and I never achieved it because every time I thought, okay, now could be the time. I found a better opportunity, or I got hired in the role of my dreams, or and somehow I never found the time to study. And yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. So would you say that you kind of stumbled into it, honestly? Like you didn't, I don't know, like, probably growing up, or even, earlier on in your education, you probably didn't, intend to go down that path, right? At least that's what it sounds like a little bit to me. Do you, because for myself, I guess, I never intended to go into IT. I thought it was the most boring thing in the world. I thought if I'm stuck in IT, like that would be, the most miserable thing ever. Right. And here I am, so many years later. Was that
Yeah.
the same sort of thought process for you as well, that you might be bored in it?
So I also somehow stumbled in it, or I see it as a puzzle. I was always IT focused. But for me, it was not the most boring job. So for me, it was the most exciting thing that
Hmm.
I could think of because, as I said, as a little girl, I was so interested in really understanding computers and communicating with them and really getting to know how they work deep inside. So I did not manage to really understand it 100% yet, but I'm yeah. So for example, what I'm also super excited about is reverse engineering and assembly, where I'm a beginner at, but I think that leads into the direction of understanding computers. So the dream I had as a little girl. But yeah, I basically I stumbled into IT security. So I did not really know that I will be working in IT when I grew up. Um, but I was somehow always interested in. Um, but the IT security path, I think I stumbled in there. So during my apprenticeship, I worked at an institute for foreign and international criminal law, and they
Hmm.
also had cybersecurity researchers. And I observed a lot of their work, or could attend even a local conference, which also got my interest sparked. And yeah, after my apprenticeship, by the way, I worked as a developer, but not for games. So, and this was when I was already hooked on security, and I was literally a pain in the ass for everybody because I was like, we need to secure our code, we need to secure our systems, and everybody was like, oh my god, it's Miriam again, and she's talking about security. And in the end, I finally reached my current goal, and they got more aware about security, and they even scanned our code. And when we found vulnerabilities, they let me fix the vulnerabilities, and I was even able to exploit them. So that was really cool.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. In the beginning of my career, I was working as basically a help desk specialist, for an
Yeah.
application for a very small company here in Chicago. And I stumbled upon security, and I started to, really dive into it because it really piqued my interest and whatnot. And so I started to look at the security of our application, and I found it to be really lacking, like really bad. And so I started to, vocalize it more and more of, hey, we need to be paying attention to this, and, all these different things. And no one was, paying attention, right? They were
Yeah.
like, oh, we patched that, that's fixed, it's not a big deal. And it got to the point where, I just sat down in my VP's office, who was telling me that everything was secure when I knew it wasn't. And I was like, okay, this vulnerability that says here that like you can gain root via this method, that we're vulnerable to, like here's the scanner. Okay, well, I'm going to get root on this thing real quick right in front of you, and show you that we're not patched. And I did it, and he was very confused as to how I achieved that. He immediately actually like called in, the lead developer. It was like, hey, how did he just do this? And they're like, oh, he couldn't have done that. Like it was patched. I'm like, well, if it was patched, I wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah.
It doesn't work out like that. And that was really when I kind of, I guess, earned, I guess, the respect of other people within the organization regarding security, so that they would actually take my recommendations, seriously, and actually act on them and whatnot. But that was a long process of me, getting so fed up to the point where it was like, all right, I'm just going to show this guy, and I'm not, I'm not a good hacker or anything like that, So me be able to pull that off, it was probably a pretty easy thing to do.
But I think it is the most effective way to prove your point, because
Yeah,
I hope at least something happened after that.
Yeah, yeah. We definitely changed a lot of things about how we handled security after that. And I mean, luckily, I got to run all of that program. Like I got to, manage it from start to finish. It was great, great experience, and I was happy because, it made my customers more secure, made them happier, right? And so it saved me a lot of headaches too, because I was going on site to, federal agencies and the DoD, and they would just be, you know, just destroying me because the product was insecure, and I was telling them
Yeah.
that it was secure because that's what I was being told. But this really alleviated a lot of headaches, like all over for me.
Yeah. I can imagine.
Hmm.
But great thing, you improved it. So yay.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so currently you're a security researcher at Microsoft, right? How did you get your start at Microsoft? What does that process look like overall? The reason why I ask is because, in IT, it's like, you get into IT, right? And all that you hear about is big tech. All that you hear about is going to work for a big tech company, and, getting in the door is the hardest part, right? What was that process like?
Yeah, so don't hate me. I was headhunted. um, so I was before I joined Microsoft, I was working first as a system administrator. And since I was all about security, security, it's so important. In my spare time, I learned everything I could about penetration testing and hacking. And I was given the chance by my former employer to build my own pen testing department. And that went quite well. And I legally hacked the first customers. And that was the time when Microsoft approached me and asked me if I wanted to work for them. And since I just achieved my dream, having a pen testing department, I just said no. And I told my husband, and my husband was like, "Are you crazy? Just to decline Microsoft? Are you crazy?" And he just couldn't take it. And he told his best friend, and then his best friend and my husband did an intervention. And they listed the positive arguments for Microsoft and the negative against Microsoft. And they convinced me to at least speak to Microsoft. And so I went into the interview process. And during this process, I was convinced that Microsoft is actually a really, really great employer, and that you could really have an impact also on security worldwide. And that was when I joined Microsoft as a premier field engineer, which is some kind of consultant. So you go to customers, you have different tasks. One of my tasks was to assess their environments for security flaws. So, for example, Active Directory security assessment or Windows Server assessment or other security assessments, basically. I also had some permanent customers I regularly worked with, and depending on your work, some were also some, yeah, um, freestyle engagements that I worked with. And yeah, so after this role, I worked as a program manager for Defender for Endpoint. Back then, it was still called Windows Defender for Endpoint and not Microsoft Defender. And this was basically the role that I was told is the only role that you could work with Corp or in Corp. This was a Corp role from Germany. And I was told this is the only role that you will ever get when you want to stay in Germany. And it was already a dream role back then because it was a great role, and you had a lot of challenging tasks and got to see so many environments and got to work with so great customers. Um, but my dream was since quite a long time to get back in red teaming or to become a security researcher. And this was when I literally tried and brute forced my application in. So human brute forcing. I applied to every security researcher position I could find within Microsoft. I applied. I got denied. And basically, it was always the question, are you willing to relocate to Redmond?
Hmm.
And for me, it was like, no, I don't want to relocate because I have my family and friends here in Germany. And so I applied a lot. I think I applied for more than 2 years. And in the end, at some point, one person that already interviewed me got promoted to be a manager. And it looks like I convinced this person in an interview before. And when he became a manager, he asked me, hey, do you still want to become a security researcher? And I was like, OMG, my heart
Hmm.
just stopped a beat. And I
Hmm.
was like, of course, yes. And so I had to go through the entire process again and got interviewed again. And I had the luck that also the interviewer had the impression that I might fit into the team. I was so obsessed with this role. And somehow I was really, really lucky that my manager and also his manager and everybody in line was up to make an exception for me to work in this role. So I was really,
Hmm.
really, really lucky, combined with a little bit of human brute forcing.
Hmm. Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's such a huge ask for someone to kind of uplift their life and move, to another country, or, for me, it would be another state, but that's still, that's a huge, huge ask, and I
Yeah,
feel like in this current, modern day ecosystem that we're in, right, where everything can be remote. It was really well proven out with COVID, right?
yeah,
Um, it's just it's almost unreasonable to ask someone to have to relocate for a role, especially if you're not an executive, right? Like
yeah,
you're not an executive, you don't have to talk with the board, you don't have to talk with other executives, necessarily like it's not necessarily like a collaboration thing even, it's just different,
yeah.
if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, so don't get me wrong, I really love visiting the States, but I just did not want to leave my family and my friends. And that was no option for me.
Yeah.
And you said it, we just proved it with COVID that it is possible. And I still don't really understand why so many companies are still trying to force, that people relocate. And so I was really, really happy uh, that it worked out for me in the end. And I think now after the pandemic, also Microsoft got a little bit, looser with the relocation policies. So
Hmm. Yeah, that's good to hear because in security you hear about other companies like Amazon demanding a 3-day work week, and internal memos coming out saying that it'll take years for them to get back to a 5-day in the office work week. It doesn't make any sense to me, because if I was to work for Amazon, right, they have a Chicago office, I would go into the Chicago office, but how many other people on my team are going to be in Chicago, right?
yeah,
So if that answer is none, then why am I in? Because everything else can be solved over a meeting,
yeah,
like it would be any other time. The logic isn't there, and I hope that companies are catching on to that in some regard. I mean, it sounds like it sounds like Microsoft has. Microsoft is probably one of the few big tech companies that, I haven't heard of a real big push to go back to the office, which is, it's refreshing, right? Because
Yeah.
other companies really take their lead off of big tech and what the big tech guys are doing, and what these other smaller companies should be doing and whatnot, because they're, really trying to keep up and keep their talent and whatnot.
Yeah. But I still think it will take some time until also the smaller companies keep up, because usually it's hard for them to just yeah, have the same policies, and not only work policy wise, also security policy wise or something like that. So they also need the people to get the work done, and to yeah, have the trust in their employees also, maybe.
Hmm. So what's the day to day like as a security researcher? Is there any cool security researching, areas or topics that you have, dove into that, kind of just like blew you away and really opened your eyes to something? Or what is that like?
So basically, every day or every project is different. So you can't say this is 100% security research. And even every role at Microsoft is different. So for my part, I work in the Microsoft 365 Defender research team. So we are the ones behind the Microsoft 365 Defender correlations and everything that is related with this area, with this topic. So if there is more than one, I used to call the sub-products pillars. So for example, Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, Defender for Office, and so on. I used to call those products pillars of Microsoft 365 Defender.
Hmm.
And as soon as there is more than one pillar involved in this project, this is our team who's working on it. And yeah, so there were many cool projects so far. And one of the latest is also related with AI. So yeah, for example, Copilot, but I cannot tell you too much about it. I'm
Hmm.
sorry.
So something like Defender for AI is potentially coming or being researched or looked into in some way.
No, that's not what I say. I don't know if that is something that is coming, but so Security Copilot was announced as your AI helper to help you to answer questions, or to just help you to see with one glance what is the problem in your environment. Because companies there are many companies that have too few employees and also not the knowledge, because knowledge is expensive. And so they need the employees that they have to do all the work, also security wise. But what if there is a really huge incident that you would need hours to get an overview on? And using Copilot, it can help you to get an overview within minutes, within seconds, basically.
Hmm.
And yeah.
That's really interesting. You know, with 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 Microsoft, it's I look at their security stack, I look at their tech stack, and I try to picture how it evolved over the years. And overall, it seems like Microsoft security is, like night and day compared to what it was even,
Yeah.
5 to 8 years ago. Which is really saying something. You typically don't see whole companies, kind of revolutionize how they do an entire, pillar of their business slash, something like security. Um, and even 8 years ago, right, it was kind of laughable if you said, "Oh, I have Microsoft Defender." Like everyone's just like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay, like that's not going to do anything for you." But now, that whole perception has completely changed within the security community. Even is like, yeah, I have Microsoft Defender and I'm protected, like I'm significantly protected, with
Yes.
this solution and whatnot. And it, I feel like Microsoft creates a very interesting scenario where you can go as far into Microsoft like as you want in terms of consuming services and providing your whole tech stack for you. Um, and they do offer other avenues to bring in your own tech stack, but it's just interesting to me that Microsoft offers, so many different services and whatnot. Do you ever find that challenging internally, potentially, to, I guess, stay on top of everything?
Oh, yes. So I don't stay on top of everything. So what I immediately thought about was when you mentioned all these technologies was the time when I went out as a PFE, so that was some kind of of a security consultant at Microsoft, and I went to customers to assess their environments. So basically, I was focused on one technology, like Active Directory security or Windows Server security, and the challenge, or one thing that I found funny slash challenging, was that when you come to a customer and you have the logo Microsoft on your back, they immediately assume that you need to know everything that Microsoft ever did, that Microsoft ever released, and you are the expert of it. And so when I came to a customer and they were like, oh, and by the way, I do have a problem with my Teams installation. Can you help me? And I was like, I have no idea about Teams. So I never worked with that. Sorry. I use it, but only as a user. And they were like, but you are Microsoft. And then you had just to explain that, yes, but you are specialized. So you have your areas of expertise and you don't know everything that Microsoft ever did, or you are not an expert in everything. So yeah, so
Yeah, that's a really good point. Even as a security professional, I feel like sometimes we just assume, right? Like when a big tech consultant is in the office, it's like, oh, okay, this is the time to bring up, absolutely
all the
everything that's going
questions.
on, like it's but that's not the best way of going about it. I have found, from being on the other side and actually providing services to customers, is to at least, point them in the right direction, for me at least, right? I'm sure at Microsoft it's so much more difficult to even do that because, it could be a team within a team, that handles this one little thing that they know about, right? Like, it's just it's a complicated problem to even just do that, I would think.
Yeah. So sometimes you don't even know who is responsible for what when it's another product. You know your peers. You also might know if you have worked with someone in the past that this is somebody you can go to and say, "Hey, hi, remember me? Great
Hmm.
talking to you again. I want to work with this product that you are currently working in. Can you help me to find the right person?" And this is basically the only way that you, yeah, get the right person, or you ask people if they know people who know other people, or you
Hmm.
just browse internally if you find some keywords connected with some other projects. But yeah, so Microsoft is huge. And if you don't know the right people or try to connect to the right people, yeah, you don't find it.
Yeah, yeah, it's going to be a very difficult time for you, and you won't be able to provide that, like, that next tier of support and service. It's networking is a critical part that, I bring up a good amount on this podcast, is because, it's not always about what you know. It's more about who you know. And that's not
Yeah,
necessarily, who is, getting you the job or anything like that. But it's like, you could be in a situation where, a customer has a question about something. It's like, well, I'm not the right person, but I know the guy. Like I can
yeah,
get you in front of them. And typically, maybe they have a backlog of like a month, right? So you can't get on their calendar for a month. It's like, well, I can get you in, tomorrow, right? And
Yeah.
those sorts of things really make the difference, because you're not only leaving a good impression within your own company for doing that, right? You're raising the bar for your own company, but you're also leaving a really good impression with that customer, and
Yeah.
so you're making connections without even really having to do that, which pays dividends. Is that something that is kind of taught at Microsoft or instructed upon at all? Is that developing your network and making sure that you're maintaining it properly and things like that? Is that ever talked about?
Yeah. So during my onboarding, but this is some time ago. So during my onboarding, there were a lot of sessions where they really advised us to network, to get to know other people, and to keep those connections alive. And yeah, I found it at first hard to have those enforced networking sessions, so
Mm,
that they said, okay, go out and network. But in the end, it really made sense. And keeping your connections in your network is really beneficial. So, as you said, it's not forgetting the job or something like that, but it's to get things done. And sometimes it can make the difference if a request just sinks down and drowns, or if you can fulfill the request, or it's also a matter of time. So if you are really eager to fulfill the request, and if you don't know anybody, it can still work out if you just do the work and just browse for who can do that and ask who can do that. But if you already know the people and have sense of direction, that is way faster than just asking around. So therefore, it's really beneficial to have your network, to know your people, and it was encouraged in the beginning, but I only found it's worth during the time. And I never network for any reasons. I try to keep it real because otherwise you don't, it's not authentic. You know what I mean? I
yeah.
really try to keep authentic and genuine connections and not just for the sake of it, because that's not how I do it.
Right. I think, one important factor with networking is being yourself, not trying to
Yes.
be something that you're not, or someone that you're not, or trying to emulate someone else. That stuff comes off as, disingenuous, and
Yeah.
people will pull away, and not want to network, not want to be a part of your network and whatnot. So it's extremely important to really just be yourself, right? And live
Yes.
in the moment, I guess. You brought up that you work on the O365 Defender team. Uh, can you can you tell me anything at all about the what was it, the Microsoft Outlook breach or attack that happened a couple weeks ago? And I'm not asking for any internal information, right? Like, because for me, right, I didn't even look into it myself. I just saw that happened, and it's like, okay, well, I'm heads down in this other thing. I can't worry about that. Can you talk to me about what it was, or what you saw, or anything like that?
I'm sorry, I'm currently on parental leave. And
Oh,
so also for the last weeks, I just saw it, but I did not really dive deep into it because my little one just does not leave me anytime. So
yeah, completely
yeah,
understandable.
yeah, you are, I think, also a father, and you know how it is. And I just have I just have some beautiful time with my son, and so I need to catch up when come back.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe we can cut
No,
that part out.
it's fine. It's not a big deal. I mean, I bring on former spies, right? For instance, and I'll ask them a question and they'll say like, "Oh, I can't answer that." And it's just on to the next topic.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal, right? Um, so, Miriam, I also saw that you put together a book pretty recently. It was released. It's PowerShell automation and scripting for cybersecurity, which I find really interesting because I'm not a developer, right? I'm not a coder or scripter, really. Like I can read it most of the time, but man, if you put me in front of a terminal and say, go create this thing, I'm not going to be able to do it. I just don't have that skill, probably because it hasn't been, ingrained into me. And at one point in time in my career, I really put a lot of effort into learning PowerShell. And PowerShell seemed to be probably the easiest, I guess, scripting language or whatever it might be, right, to learn for me to actually pick up. And so I always, really enjoyed doing anything in PowerShell, and the power that PowerShell actually gives you on a system is enormous, right? And you don't realize that until you start diving into it. So
Yeah.
what made you want to go down this path? And one, why did you want to write a book? Because that's a huge undertaking right there. And why did you choose this topic?
So basically, this is also something that I just stumbled in. I never planned it. I always thought that it was really cool writing a book, and I thought I will never achieve it. I thought this is really, really big. And I was very active in the PowerShell security community. I presented at conferences like Black Hat or PSConf EU or others. And I also wrote some open source tools using PowerShell, which I also presented at those conferences. And somehow, I think this was my footprint in the internet. And one day, I was contacted by the publisher Pact, and they were like, "Hey, we saw that you do a lot with PowerShell security, and we find that really interesting. Would you be willing to write a book for us?"
Hmm.
And I was so flattered at first, and so I'm still flattered that they chose me or picked me and approached me. But my first thoughts were like, OMG, I will never be able to write this book. There's so much knowledge that you need to put into that book, and I don't have that knowledge. At least that was my first thought. And then I just thought about it longer and longer. So I really took my time to think about it. And the more I thought about it, I was like, oh, I would really like to read that book, and basically what would be needed for this book. And I already structured it in my head. And at some point I was like, okay, basically you already have a lot of knowledge regarding PowerShell security. Um, and there might be some topics that you need to research, but they are not, it's not that much. And so yeah, sometimes I say I made the worst mistake in my life and agreed. But basically, I'm still really happy that I wrote this book, but it was so much work that I just joke sometimes that I made the mistake and agreed. Um, and when I agreed, I did not know how much work there will follow. And then yeah, I just started structuring it and creating a table of contents and just thinking about what could be in the book and in which order, which structure. And in the end, during the process, this also really changed. Not too much, but in the end, I added 2 chapters that I initially did not think about. And I when I was writing it, I could just add so much more uh, information that was not necessarily PowerShell related, but security related. And at some point, I was really, yeah, just burning to write down all the knowledge. And but in the end, you just have to make the cut at some point and decide what belongs in this book and what doesn't. And if there was some information that does not belong in the book, because otherwise it would have become huge, and it already is really, really huge. So I think almost 600 pages,
Wow.
574, I think, or something like that. Don't pin me on this,
Hmm.
but it's already really, really big. And I would have also, I could have added more months to just make it even bigger. And
Wow.
if there is some information in there that I think is or might be interesting, but not relevant for this book, I also mentioned it and linked it, or mentioned some other sources.
Hmm. So you dive into a lot with that, but I really kind of want to break down the decision and what was going through your head when you were offered this opportunity, right? Because there's a lot of people out there. I mean, probably, 95%, if not more, of people would have probably said, no, I'm okay. That's too hard of a task for me. I don't know what that entails. Or, there's a million different excuses you'd come up with to get out of that,
Yeah.
right? Like, I don't know what that entails. I've never done that before, and this and that, right? Um, but you won't know until you do it.
Yes.
And jumping into that unknown water is it's scary, to say the least. It's scary. I remember when I accepted the contract to create my first cybersecurity course on the three clouds and how they compare to each other and whatnot. And I stayed up that night, the night that I had accepted it, and I was like, why did I just do this? Like,
Yes.
this is dumb. I just made a mistake. Now I'm bound by contract to
I
complete
feel
this
you.
thing. Like, I don't know how to create a table of contents. I don't know how to create an introduction or like anything like that, right? And I got through it. And it's funny. I look back when I was recording my course, um, and I was such like a nervous recorder. I didn't want to record or be on video or anything. Now I have a podcast, and I talk to people about things that I know nothing about. Um, it's such a night and day difference. And now when I record courses, it's totally different. It's easy. I get through them pretty quick now. But what was that like for you? Did you like also, sign the contract essentially, and then like, what the hell did I just do? Like, what did I just sign? Like,
Several times.
yeah.
Not only after signing. So after signing, I think I felt really good, but the next day I was like, OMG, why did I do that? I'm not able to write that book. And sometimes you really had those doubts in your head. And not only at the beginning, but also during the writing, you had some really, really deep lows. And I was thinking, okay, I will never be able to achieve this, to finish the book. And at some point, I also had the thoughts about just throwing it off, so that I just lay down the project and say, okay, sorry, I can't finish it, or whatever. So, but in the end, you can get yourself motivated again. Um, and it's basically those challenges that you need to overcome. And it's all in your head. So it's not that you are not able to do it. It's just in your head. And that's a tricky thing, because your head plays tricks on you, and you feel like you are not able to achieve your task. And when you just look at it, it looks so big. But in the end, you just need to start. And if you just sit on your computer and don't get distracted by, for example, your mobile phone or anything else, um, um, then you just sit at your computer and you just write one word. and after that word follows another. Or if you are not in the mood for writing, you maybe think about the illustrations for your book, and suddenly you are there. If you just said for yourself, okay, I'm so demotivated today, but I just have to just work at least half an hour on it, just to check my box, to check my check mark. I just need to work half an hour on it, and then I can just let it be and finish my day. And then you just get started and work half an hour on it, and then you're just hooked. You are right there in the writing, and then you are like, okay, now I can't finish. I need to finish what I have started, and then you are in the flow again. So sometimes you really have bad days when you can't concentrate, but somehow you just need to pull through and sit down and just get the work done.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I wonder, when you embarked on this journey of writing the book, and now you have finished the book, you've published it. When you look back on it, when you started it, how much of the book did you already know? How much of that knowledge did you already have?
Ah,
And
okay.
then how much, when you were going through it, were you like, oh, I need to research this a little bit more before I put this into the book and, kind of get that information right in my head? I would assume, you probably had somewhere around like 70, 85%, of the knowledge that it was required. And the rest of it is probably, fine tuning and adding a little bit more color and things like that to it. Is that correct, or was it a different process for you?
That's a very good assumption. So I think there were two topics that I thought, okay, I really need to research them. Um, and the rest, I already had knowledge about them. But while you're writing, you you are writing down your facts, and then you can either demonstrate it in your environment, or if there are some background facts that you at some time maybe heard of, but you're not 100% sure if that really was the case. And then you just have to get a source for that, so that you can say, okay, yes, all the content that I wrote down in this book is 100% true. And, or yeah, so at least I
Hmm.
hope so. I have some good technical reviews, I think. And I did my research to make sure that everything I wrote down is 100% true. But as I said, even if you have the knowledge, sometimes you just need to research to, yeah, also have a source
Hmm.
in your backhand. But for the actual research part, so knowledge versus research, I would say that 85% is a really good assumption. So yeah, as I said, I
Hmm.
think there were two topics that I needed to research. I had some basic knowledge about it, but for going deeper, I needed the research, and the rest, yeah, I think
Hmm.
was knowledge.
Does does Microsoft offer like a authors group, to internal employees or anything like that? Because I ask because I would assume that there's been several, Microsoft employees that have written books on topics, and that are well respected topics, or well respected books even. And when I look at some of the top authors from within Microsoft, right, Mark Russinovich is right at the top of that list. The value that he provides on the Windows internals series of
Yes.
books is uh, it is it's extraordinarily valuable, right? Like, yeah, I mean, I have it, behind me somewhere as well. Like, it's one of those books where, like, if you're in IT, like, you need to pick it up, even if you're not going to read 80% of it, that 20% that you do read, like, you're going to understand that aspect of Windows so much more. Is there anything like that at Microsoft that kind of supports new authors or authors that are soon to be published or things like that? Because I would assume that Mark Rusinovich, has a lot of experience that others could use and utilize and whatnot. And I think that would be helpful if something like that existed.
So I don't know if something like that exists,
Hmm.
but if it does, please let me know if you find out.
Yeah, that would be hard for me to find out, especially on the outside of Microsoft.
Yeah. So I don't know, honestly.
Oh, no
So
worries.
yeah.
Yeah, so Miriam, we're right at the top of our time here, and I'm trying to be very conscious of everyone's schedules and whatnot. But before I let you go, why don't you tell my audience, where they could find you if they wanted to reach out to you, where they could find, your book and any other resources that you may want my audience to check out.
So you can find me on Twitter under Miriam Xura. I will just send the link to you later. And on Mastodon, I'm MW at InfoSec Exchange. And on LinkedIn, you can find me under Miriam Wiesner or Miriam C. Wiesner, like on the book. And you can get this book on Amazon or in the bookstore of your choice. And as we speak, I don't know when you will release this episode, but now in October until the 31st October, there is Cybersecurity Awareness Month launched by PACT. This means that you can get my book as well as other cybersecurity books for 20% off with the code 20cyberbooks, I think. Let me just check. I will send the code to you. Let me check. Yes, 20 cyberbooks. It is.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks, Miriam. I really appreciate you coming on. And I hope everyone listening enjoyed this episode. All of the links that she mentioned will be in the description of the episode.